Well, our top story: after Pfizer, US panel of experts on Thursday has voted to recommend emergency use authorization of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, the second vaccine after Pfizer. Well, what does this really mean? We have Dr. Zanya Stamataki, senior lecturer in viral immunology, joining us from the University of Birmingham in the UK. We're also being joined by Professor Girdharar Babu, epidemiologist from Bangalore. Thank you both very much for being with us. Let me begin, Dr. Zanya, by asking you, this is good news that's coming in from the United States?
This is fantastic news. We are now anticipating more vaccines to become approved for use around the world. We do not have enough vaccines, even with the Pfizer vaccine alone, to circulate around the globe. And more vaccines are going to become available as the days and months go by. This is excellent news and very welcomed.
All right. And is the UK also now, perhaps, and other parts of Europe also going to consider, if the FDA does go ahead and approve the Moderna vaccine?
The Moderna vaccine has got very similar technology to the Pfizer vaccine. So the countries that have considered the Pfizer vaccination have no reason not to consider the Moderna to top up the stocks as well.
All right. Well, let's also get in a word from Professor Babu. Professor Babu, India has no tie-up with Moderna. We didn't have a tie-up with Pfizer as well. How are we looking at this news?
I think since both the vaccines are similar, in most of whether it's adverse effects or efficacy, the only difference seems to be Moderna's advantage in terms of the cold chain. And the cold chain system that the Moderna possesses, both in terms of what it can be stored at the 24-hour to 48 hours deadline, and also in terms for 1 month in -20 degrees, those are the advantages Moderna has over Pfizer. Given this scenario, whether government should consider this vaccine is another question that we need to consider. But the cost of per dose of Moderna is definitely higher. So therefore, I think this is a decision that the highest decision-making body will have to take.
Right. It's very interesting that you talk about the cold chain. The Pfizer vaccine was, termed to be unviable for India given the cold chain requirements. But the Moderna vaccine, do you believe logistically it makes sense for India, because -20 degrees is definitely more achievable than -70?
It seems so, especially for its ability to be stored in domestic refrigerator for at least 2 days at the point of delivery. However, the forbidding costs per dose will it make really difficult for implementation in India. Right. I'm hopeful that the other results will be available of the other vaccines, and then the Indian government has more choices to make in terms of which is more effective, more feasible, and yet affordable.
All right. So that's, of course, the initial reactions that are coming in. The FDA, remember, of course, has recommended this, but it hasn't yet been approved. We'll keep a close watch on what happens in the United States. But the other development, the big development that we're tracking in terms of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is the Alaskan health worker who had a serious allergic reaction after getting a dose of the Pfizer-BioNTech coronavirus vaccine. While he's said to be stable, the adverse reaction in the person came minutes after the Pfizer shot, and a similar reaction was reported in 2 cases in Britain as well. Now, Britain's medical regulator has said that anyone with a history of anaphylaxis or severe allergic reaction to medicine or food should not get the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. The US FDA has said that most Americans, even with allergies, should be safe, but only those who've had some severe allergic reactions to vaccines or the particular ingredients in the vaccine should avoid it, and also that people who are getting the vaccine should be monitored for a period of 15 minutes after they receive the jab. Well, is the vaccine safe for everyone? I think this is the big question that is on everyone's mind, and let's take that to the experts. Dr. Zanya, which way would you weigh in? Are you worried at all about the news that's coming in of these allergic reactions?
I can reassure people that I am not at all worried about this news. These vaccines are going to be now given to thousands and thousands of people, and some of us are prone to allergic reactions which we cannot predict beforehand. This is why experts are monitoring people that receive the vaccination. This is not unique to the coronavirus vaccine. This is for all vaccinations that someone might receive. You have to monitor the patient for a little while after the vaccination to ensure that their body is not mounting an allergic response. This is not worrying news at all. And in the numbers that these incidents are coming in, it's quite reassuring, actually.
All right. Dr. Babu, would you agree? Are you not concerned or worried about these reactions at all?
I think we need to have a strong registry for adverse events following immunization, because these vaccines are permitted under emergency use authorization. We need to be watchful of the adverse effects. I'm not alarmed over the kind of reports that have been reported as of now, but in the long run, I think we need to monitor very closely in terms of the adverse events, not just for these two vaccines, but all the other vaccine candidates that are going to be available in future. That will ensure vaccine confidence will be enhanced at every population level.
Dr. Zania, there is now guidelines on, if you have allergic reactions to certain components in the vaccine, or you have certain food allergies, you perhaps shouldn't go ahead and get a shot. Do you believe that it's time perhaps, for this registry that Professor Babu is talking about to be made public? Should there be very clear guidelines on who should and shouldn't get the shot?
I am very confident, actually, with what the professor suggested, that there are recording adverse effects. This has been an emergency approval of a vaccine, but under any other circumstances as well, these adverse effects will be monitored and looked at very, very carefully. There are strict guidelines for people that are able to receive the vaccine as a priority, and as we gather data with the thousands of people that become vaccinated, we are going to know more about this. As it stands, we have no reason to be alarmed. We are collecting data and we're proceeding as planned.
Right. Professor Babu, what about, in a country like India, recording adverse reactions, you say, is critical, but who should or shouldn't be getting the vaccine? For instance, we know the vaccine hasn't even been tried in younger people, so population under 16 hasn't even participated in the trial, so they're ruled out for now. But what are the kind of broad guidelines you think, we need to make public on who should and shouldn't be getting the shot?
I think no vaccine should be given on the population where the vaccine has not been tried out. So that's the first criteria. We should understand what kind of adverse effects have already been seen in the trial. So the indigenous vaccine development which is occurring, I am eager to see their efficacy results and also safety results.
Right.
Once we know that, we'll know which kind of population subgroups have been subjected to the trial, and based on that, we can immediately the vaccination for those groups. As rightly said, the subgroups of population such as pregnant women, children, and others whom we have not tested out should then be subjected to the trials first, and then be given the vaccine later.
All right. So very interesting. You're saying that if a vaccine hasn't been tried on a certain section of a population or in a certain part of the world, then it shouldn't ideally be administered. That does open windows of opportunities, but also closes doors for several vaccines, especially in the Indian context. Dr. Zania, thanks very much for being with us. Professor Babu, we'd request you to stay on, because let's just shift our focus to the India story that we're tracking at the moment. And the data has actually been very interesting. India's recorded in the last 24 hours 22,890 new coronavirus cases. Now, this has taken India's total caseload currently to 99.7 lakhs. So we are inching closer to the 1 crore mark. But here's the interesting statistics. In the last 24 hours, for instance, infections are down by 4.6%. Now, the Union Health Ministry has said that COVID-19 cases in India are steadily coming down, while the caseload of infection in many parts of the world is experiencing a second or even a third wave. Recoveries in India have crossed the 95 lakh mark. Professor Babu, widely, many experts had predicted that come winter, India's coronavirus cases will rise. We will see a very difficult winter period. What, according to you, is the reason why our cases are dipping despite the extreme cold?
Yeah, so to put things in perspective, if you compare the United States, which is roughly seeing around 200,000 cases on a daily basis. The entire European Union will be looking at around 128,000, but India is around 28,000 cases per day. And this we are trying to average at the national level. But if you see in terms of the states, the distribution is completely heterogeneous. In the northeastern states, such as Sikkim, Ladakh, there is a 7-day test positivity rate of around 8.9%. Whereas Delhi was peaking with the third wave some time ago, and now Delhi seems to be coming down. So what's happening in India is the outbreak is shifting from one state to another, and these are affected at a different points of time. One, two, different population groups are getting the transmission at these points of time. As long as we increase the testing in rural areas and all the areas in a very uniform manner, if we are ahead of the virus and then predict where the next transmission is going to come and increase the testing there, we'll have reliable numbers. However, overall, it seems that most number of cases, at least in the dense pockets of urban areas, has come down. That's a relief. Whereas in the rural areas and the areas where the earlier peak has not taken place, there the testing has to be improved. So it's a mixed picture. We should be careful because once the susceptible pool builds up anywhere, there is a risk of increase in cases in those areas.
What according to you, and we also looked at testing, and testing hasn't rapidly declined. Usually one sees that there is a correlation between a dip in testing and a dip in numbers. But on the 17th of December, the cases were 9% lower than the 16th of December. Today on the 18th of December, cases are 4.6% lower than yesterday, for instance. So despite the extreme cold, where many had predicted that cases would rise exponentially, we're actually seeing a decline. What would you attribute as the reasons for this decline?
Okay, one of the reason definitely is the most dense pockets in urban areas have been infected in the earlier phase. Therefore, if you increase testing there, you're not going to increase the number of cases detected in those areas. So that's one. Second, if you look at the testing numbers alone, then we will be misguided. If we have to look at where the tests are done, I can take an educated guess. Nearly 50% of the tests in every state is done in the state capital and the major urban areas. And in the remaining 50%, where it is being done, there was a brilliant survey done in the state of Karnataka where they looked at both acute and the past infections. We could actually predict which cases, which districts are going to have the surge in future.
Yes.
And the state made a decision to increase the testing in those districts.
Right.
So that kind of a dynamic shift has to occur. So yes, it is real decrease in cases in urban areas. And the second reason might be because we might be missing a minor proportion of cases because we are not testing well in other areas.
Would you go so far as to say on the basis of the current data that we're past the peak, that the worst is over, or would that be very premature at the moment?
I mean, one of the things which has always proved every person wrong is in being able to do that. So Delhi had 3 waves and nobody could predict that well in advance.
Yes.
I can say the worst is over, but in terms of the peaks, it is going to be at different places at different points of time. I would wait for some more time.
And 95 lakh recoveries. India has over 95 lakh people who've recovered, even though our total caseload is now inching closer to the 1 crore mark. Those are encouraging statistics?
These are encouraging. If you overall look at the scenario, 9.9 million cases.
Yes.
Based on the National Sero Survey, if you look at even if we are missing 10 infections for every reported cases, that is 10 times the number of infections the country must have had. So therefore, many people might have recovered. That's a good news in terms of our demographic dividend, what we speak of, the median age being 28 years, and the young age definitely a good factor in terms of recovery. However, if you break down that into areas where health system is poor, in terms of the elderly and those who have comorbidity, you should also remember India has a high burden of undetected comorbidities.
Yes, absolutely.
So therefore, So therefore, and if they happen to be in remote, vulnerable groups,
right.
Well,
I think that's very important perspective. While we look at these numbers at the moment, one must look at it with several filters and riders, like Professor Babu has just put in perspective for us. Thanks very much for sparing your time and being with us. We're going to slip into a very short break at this moment. But up next, we'll have experts answer all your questions on the coronavirus. Stay tuned. Welcome back. It's that time when we answer your questions on the coronavirus. Dr. Suranjit Chatterjee, Senior Consultant, Internal Medicine, Indraprastha Apollo Hospital with us. Thanks so much for being with us. The first question today has been sent from Sakshi in Gurugram. Let's listen in.
I want to ask one question. Are antibiotics effective in preventing or treating COVID-19?
Dr. Chatterjee, antibiotics effective in dealing with COVID?
No. See, a few antibiotics have been found that they have some antiviral property. That is why when initially it was used, like azithromycin or doxycycline, which are antibiotics, had some antiviral property, and that's why they were being used. But otherwise, since this is a viral infection, antibiotics have no role unless and until there is a secondary bacterial infection over and above the COVID infection. So, per se, antibiotics have no definite role except for a few ones which have been found to have some antiviral properties.
All right. Our next question has been sent from Anusha in Hyderabad.
After vaccination, can we live a normal life? Do we have to take precautions or wear masks?
Well, Dr. Chatterjee, $1 million question. I think a lot of our viewers want to know that.
Everybody wants to ask this question, but the thing is that just after vaccination, obviously you're not going to lead a normal life. You have to wear your mask, the social distancing has to continue, because there has to be an optimal number of people who have to be vaccinated first when the transmission can stop. So post-vaccination, you have to wear mask, you have to have the social distancing, because what happens with vaccination is that you are vaccinated, so you may not get the infection yourself, but you can still infect other people by coughing out the virus. So this mask wearing and the social distancing has to continue for quite some time, for quite a few months, until the time the cycle of transmission is broken.
All right. So masks and social distancing is going to be the norm for a while, even after the vaccine has been disseminated and you have in fact been inoculated. I think that's very important perspective. Dr. Chatterjee, thanks so much for sparing your time and being with us. Well, and finally, we leave you with a pretty spectacular scene from the streets of Mumbai. A man dressed as Santa Claus carried out a sanitization drive and distributed masks to people in Rani Lakshmi Chowk. We leave you with these pictures.